There is a bridge in the California desert that almost nobody has ever crossed. It stands nearly 200 feet above the floor of a dry gorge, a long curve of redwood timber, bent like a drawn bow, holding up a set of railroad tracks that lead from nothing to nowhere. No train has run across it in years. There is no station near it. No road reaches it. To stand underneath it, you have to walk for miles through rock and creosote, and when you finally look up, the thing does not make sense. It is too big, too finished, too carefully made for a place this empty. It is said to be the largest all-wood trestle in the world. It was put together without nails and curved on purpose, bent against the wind that funnels through this canyon so the gale would have less of it to push on. Somebody engineered that. Somebody hauled the timber out here. Somebody stood where you are standing and decided this was worth it. And then everybody left. The men who built this line called it the Impossible Railroad. Look at the map, and you can see why they meant it. And you can see something stranger. A railroad that starts in one of the great cities of the American coast runs east toward the rest of the country, and then, a few miles in, quietly slips across the border and out of the United States entirely, as if the only way forward were to leave. The rails are the clue. The question is why they are here at all. And the answer starts with a man who could not stand the idea of coming second. At the turn of the last century, San Diego had a problem it could not build its way out of. It sat in the far corner of the country, beautiful and boxed in, with mountains at its back and no direct railroad heading east. If you wanted to move people or freight to the rest of America, you went north first, up to Los Angeles, into the network that Los Angeles controlled. Every ton of cargo, every through passenger was a small reminder that San Diego lived on someone else's line. For most people, that was just geography. For John D. Spreckels, it was intolerable. Spreckels was the richest man in the city, and by some distance. He had come out of the Spreckels sugar fortune, and by the early 1900s, he owned what felt like half of San Diego, the Grand Hotel del Coronado, the two big newspapers, the streetcar system, a water company that supplied the city itself. He had almost everything a man could buy. What he did not have, what money alone could not hand him, was independence for the place he had bet his life on. As long as the only way east ran through his rival to the north, San Diego was a branch office, so he decided to build his own way out. A railroad straight east, over the mountains and across the desert, until it met the transcontinental lines on the far side and gave San Diego a door to the rest of the country that no one else held the key to. The company was chartered in December of 1906. The following September in 1907, they broke ground down at Main and 26th Streets in front of a crowd. There was a quiet piece of the deal the crowd did not know. The Southern Pacific Railroad, the giant of the West, was secretly helping to fund the project. But the face of it, the will behind it, the name on it, was Spreckels. This was going to be the proof. Not a hotel, not a newspaper. 140-some miles of steel that said the city was nobody's afterthought. He had no idea what it would cost him. Almost nobody did. The engineers understood the problem before the first shovel went in. To go east out of San Diego, you have to get through the mountains, and past them the ground drops into raw desert. There is no gentle way through. A railroad hates steep ground, a grade too sharp, and the train cannot climb it or cannot stop coming down. The whole art of the thing is finding a path that stays almost level while the land refuses to cooperate. Out here, the land refused harder than almost anywhere they had tried. That is where the nickname came from. The Impossible Railroad. It was not marketing. It was what men who built railroads for a living said when they looked at the route. And the route did something no one quite expected. To connect an American city to America, the line had to leave the country. There was no sane way to keep it entirely on the U.S. side, so for roughly 44 miles, the railroad crosses the border below San Diego, runs through Tijuana and Tecate on Mexican soil, and only then swings back north into the United States near a place called Campo. A separate Mexican company was set up to operate that stretch. Sit with that for a second. The line built to make San Diego independent had to spend a quarter of its distance in another nation to do it. Then came the worst of it, an 11-mile slot in the mountains called Carrizo Gorge. To get a railroad through that gorge, the crews bored 17 separate tunnels, more than 13,000 feet of holes driven straight through rock in that one short stretch alone. Along the whole line, there were 21 tunnels, and something close to 2.5 miles of bridges and trestles hung across empty air. Every foot of it was money, leaving one man's fortune, and time, and the patience of crews, working in heat that could kill you. The mountains were not an obstacle to be beaten and forgotten. They were the other character in the story. They were patient. They did not need to win any single day. They only had to still be there when everyone got tired. It was supposed to take a few years and about $6 million. It took 13 years, and it broke every estimate they made. The delays were not ordinary delays. In 1911, with revolution burning through northern Mexico, armed men attacked the construction crews on the stretch below the border. In 1916, a great flood tore out sections of line that had already been laid. Then the First World War arrived, and the price of materials climbed by half, in some cases more, and the federal government stepped in and halted railroad construction outright before eventually letting this one go on. Every one of those years, the mountains sat where they were and waited. By the time the last of it was laid, the $6 million railroad had cost something like $18 million, roughly 3 times the estimate, and an enormous fortune for the day. It had cost the years, and by every account it had cost Spreckels his health. He was no longer a young man. He was 66. Then, on the 15th of November 1919, it was done. Picture the moment, because it is the whole point of the story. When a railroad is finished, the men who built it drive one last spike, and sometimes, if the line means enough, that spike is gold. It does not hold anything down. It is a way of saying this is complete and it was worth it. On that November afternoon, the last spike was a golden one, set waiting in the track. And it was not a foreman who swung the maul. It was Spreckels himself, 66 years old, 13 years and $18 million behind him, his health already spent on this. And he lifted the hammer and drove the thing home with his own hands. For that one blow, everything he had bet came out even. Around him, a crowd. Above him and behind him, the mountains he had beaten, silent, the way they had been silent the whole time. 2 weeks later, the first official passenger train rolled into San Diego's depot. Within the month, you could board a Pullman car in the city and ride it on his rails all the way through to Chicago. The middle of the country reached from the far corner of it, without asking Los Angeles for anything. For one afternoon, the argument was won. The city had its own way east. The man had his proof. Stand in that afternoon, and it looks like the top of the mountain, the summit of a life's ambition, paid for in full. Hold on to that feeling, because it was not the summit. It was the high water mark. Here's the part the golden spike does not tell you. Almost as soon as the line was finished, the mountains began quietly taking it back. Rainstorms washed out track in 1926, again in 27, again in 29. Then came 1932, the worst year the line ever had. Fire, flood, and landslide closed 3 tunnels. Repairs ran past $600,000, and in the spring of that year, an earthquake brought down one of the tunnels in Carrizo Gorge, Tunnel 15, collapsing the very rock the crews had fought through a decade before. Now here is where you have to understand who was making the decisions. By this point, the railroad was no longer really Spreckels. He was dead, and that same year, his heirs were selling the line to the Southern Pacific, the giant of the West, the very power the whole thing had been built to get out from under. So the men looking at the collapsed tunnel in 1932 were, in effect, the new owners of a line the mountains were already reclaiming. They had a simple choice: give up that stretch, the hardest, most expensive miles on the whole route, or spend real money again to find a way past the ruin. They decided it was worth it. And this is where the beautiful thing gets built. To bypass the collapsed tunnel, across 1932 and 33. They threw a trestle across the mouth of a side canyon, that long curve of redwood nearly 200 feet tall, the one you can still walk to today. They built it out of wood on purpose. The chief engineer knew steel would fatigue and crack in the wild temperature swings of the gorge, so he chose timber instead, the same wood the line's own ties were cut from. He curved the whole span against the canyon wind. They put it together without nails. It is said to be the largest wooden trestle in the world, and standing under it, you believe it. It is the single most ambitious thing anyone ever built on this railroad, and it was the last time anyone tried that hard. Now look at it again, knowing when it was made. We are trained to read a structure like that as a triumph, the crown jewel of the line, the masterpiece. It is the opposite. It was built after the victory to patch a wound the mountains had already opened. It is not a monument to conquest, it is a splint on a broken leg, the most magnificent repair anyone could make on a railroad that was already losing. And the man whose fear built the whole thing never saw it. John Spreckels had died in 1926, 6 years before the earthquake, before the trestle, before the worst of the taking back began. He had his one afternoon in 1919, and then his health, spent on the line, gave out inside 7 years. He did not live to watch the mountains start reaching for it, and he did not live to see where it ended up. The railroad built to make San Diego independent of the Southern Pacific's world was, by the time that trestle went up, being sold into the Southern Pacific's hands. The proof of independence passed quietly to the rival it was meant to defy. The summit was an illusion. The spike did not finish the story. It only marked the highest point before the long way down. The line did not die in a single dramatic collapse. It was walked away from a little at a time over decades, which is somehow worse. The automobile arrived, and then the airplane, and the reasons to ride a train through a desert gorge thinned out year by year. Scheduled passenger service through the mountains ended in 1951, after the crowds had already stopped coming. The trains that once carried people to Chicago went quiet. Then, in September of 1976, a hurricane named Kathleen came ashore and tore out track and bridges east of the city. The owners tried to abandon the mountain line outright. Regulators refused to let them for a while. But refusal is not the same as use. The hard miles, the tunnels, the gorge, the great trestle, simply fell out of service. That desert stretch has sat unused since around 2008. And every effort since to bring it back has quietly failed. San Diego, in the end, was fine. It grew into a large and prosperous city, but it never became the great independent eastern port that the impossible railroad was built to make it. The argument Spreckels spent his fortune and his health to win was not lost in a battle. It was simply, slowly conceded. The city stopped needing to win it, and the mountains outlasted the men who did. The tame end of the line lives on. Some of that original right-of-way carries commuter trolleys through the city today. But the impossible end, the part that mattered most, the part they called a miracle, is a hiking trail now. The Great Trestle is a landmark you visit on foot, so walk back out to the bridge. It is still there. The redwood is still sound enough to stand under, still curved against a wind that no longer has anything to knock down. Somewhere below your feet is the rock they tunneled through and the tunnel that failed, and the reason this beautiful thing was ever raised in a place with no town, no road, and no train. A man built all of this because he could not bear for his city to be an afterthought. He gave it 13 years, a fortune, and most of what was left of his life, and for one afternoon he won. And the thing he defied, the mountains, the desert, the slow arithmetic of time, never really beat him. It didn't have to. It only had to wait him out, and then let the thing he built stand here in the sun, enormous and exquisite and completely unused. That is the part that stays with you walking away. Not that the railroad failed, that it succeeded brilliantly at exactly the thing that could not save it. The world you spend your life defying doesn't need to defeat you. It only needs to outlast you, and then let what you made stand there, admired and empty and quiet. How did anyone build this and then walk away?